The bank manager's face didn't just pale, it drained, like someone had pulled a plug. His eyes flicked from the passbook in his hands to me, then to the glass doors behind me, and back again. His fingers trembled as he stood up too fast, chair legs screeching across tile. "Lock the doors," he whispered to his assistant. "And call the police." All I'd done was slide a thin, brittle passbook across the counter. My dead grandfather's passbook. The same one my mother had tossed into the trash less than 24 hours earlier, calling it worthless junk. I remember thinking, as the assistant's hands shook dialing 911, that some secrets refuse to stay in the grave. And some of them have teeth. My name is Danica Gross. I'm 31 years old, a paralegal in Columbus, Ohio, and my life, until that moment, was aggressively ordinary. I drive a 12-year-old sedan that makes a noise like a dying whale when it turns left. I rent a small apartment with uneven floors and a neighbor who practices the trumpet exclusively at midnight. I don't gamble. I don't speculate. I read contracts for a living and argue politely with people who think fine print is optional. There's one thing about me my family has never liked. I notice things, ask questions, and once I sense something doesn't add up, I don't let it go. They call it a character flaw. It would turn out to be the only reason the truth survived, and why grandfather Eugene Gross died at 89 on a Sunday night. The funeral was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Small, efficient, and stripped of anything that might slow the process down. That was my mother's doing. Miriam Gross ran the event the way she ran everything else. Emotionally sterile and tightly scheduled, like a corporate offsite, 30-minute ceremony. 45-minute reception. No deviations. The food was awful. So much mayonnaise it felt intentional, like someone believed blandness was a virtue. My mother moved through the room with a clipboard and a polite, distant smile, thanking people for coming as if they'd attended a conference instead of mourning a man who'd lived nearly 9 decades. My brother Wyatt showed up 40 minutes late, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He breezed in with an apology already rehearsed. "Parking was a nightmare," he said. Despite the gravel lot being roughly the size of a football field, he hugged no one. His eyes barely touched the casket. He checked his phone constantly, thumbs moving in sharp, practiced motions. When an old family friend asked how he was holding up, Wyatt sighed and said, "I'm monitoring some investments," as if grief were an inconvenient calendar conflict. Wyatt loved talking about money. Loved measuring everything in returns, standing there watching them. I felt like I was attending a performance rather than a goodbye. That wasn't how Eugene had been. My grandfather had spent 40 years as an accountant. Numbers were his first language. Order, balance, patience, those were his comforts. But to me, he was the man on the wraparound porch of his farmhouse, teaching me chess when I was 7, pouring lemonade into sweating glasses while cicadas screamed in the heat. "Chess isn't about the pieces you capture," he used to say, tapping the board. "It's about the positions you create." Another favorite, delivered with a small smile and a knowing look. "The truth is patient. It can wait longer than any lie." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I do now. 2 weeks before he died, I drove out to the farmhouse to visit him. He was frail, his body smaller somehow, but his eyes were sharp, focused, alive in a way that made the rest of him feel like a temporary inconvenience. As I stood to leave, he reached out and grabbed my hand with a strength that startled me. "The passbook," he whispered. "In my study. Chess book. Only you, Danica." That was all. No explanation. Just urgency. I promised him. Even though I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. After the funeral, the family gathered at the farmhouse like scavengers following a schedule. My mother barely waited until coats were off before talking about selling the property. Square footage. Market conditions. "Good timing," she said, as if death were a strategic choice. Wyatt nodded along, offering suggestions, talking about renovations and curb appeal. It was painfully clear this conversation had happened before. Probably while my grandfather was still alive, still sitting on that porch. I felt sick. While they debated profit margins, I slipped away down the familiar hallway, past the creaking floorboard near the kitchen, and into my grandfather's study. The room smelled like old paper and lemon oil. Sunlight cut through the dust, landing on the bookcase where his chess books still sat in perfect order. That's where I found the passbook. And that's where everything began to unravel. I closed the study door behind me and just stood there for a moment, breathing it in. The room was small, cramped in a way that felt intentional, like my grandfather wanted the world kept at a manageable distance. The shelves were packed tight with books, most of them accounting texts and chess manuals, their spines faded and soft with age. The air smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco, a scent so familiar it made my chest ache. The chess book was easy to find. Strategic Endgame, a master's guide. It was exactly where it had always been, third shelf from the top right side, perfectly aligned. I pulled it free without thinking, and immediately froze. It was too heavy. Not dramatically so. Just wrong. Subtly wrong. The kind of wrong you only notice if you're paying attention. I opened it, expecting yellowed pages and margin notes. Instead, the pages had been hollowed out with surgical precision. Inside sat an old leather passbook, its edges cracked and worn smooth from handling. It looked ancient, like it belonged in a museum display, not hidden inside a chess manual in rural Ohio. The cover was faded, the lettering barely legible, but the weight of it in my hands felt deliberate, planned. This wasn't something forgotten. This was something hidden that I carried it into the living room, still trying to process what I was holding. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "I found something in Grandpa's study." Her reaction was immediate. "Too fast. Too sharp." Miriam crossed the room in 3 long strides and ripped the passbook from my hands before I could finish the sentence. She barely glanced at it. "Not really." Then, without hesitation, she turned and threw it straight into the kitchen trash. "This is garbage," she snapped. "Old accounts that don't even exist anymore." I just stared at her. "It should have stayed buried with him," she added, her voice cold now, clipped. "Don't go digging through his things, Danica. It's not appropriate." The word buried echoed in my head from the couch. Wyatt laughed. "Always the sentimental one, aren't you, Danny?" He didn't even look up from his phone. Then it happened, and my mother looked at my brother. My brother looked back. The exchange lasted maybe half a second, barely visible, but I saw it. 8 years in a law firm teaches you to read people in the moments they think don't count. It was the look people share when they're afraid someone is getting too close. My stomach dropped. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed replaying the scene over and over. If the passbook was truly worthless, my mother would have dismissed it, mocked it, rolled her eyes. She wouldn't have reacted with anger. She wouldn't have moved that fast. And she definitely wouldn't have thrown it away so decisively. And my grandfather had been an accountant for 40 years. He didn't make mistakes. He didn't keep meaningless things. And he certainly didn't hollow out a chess book and whisper instructions on his deathbed for no reason. People only react with anger when they have something to hide. By 5 a.m., I had made my decision. I was going back to the farmhouse. The sky was still gray as I drove, the world caught in that quiet pre-dawn pause where everything feels suspended. I turned the radio off. I needed the silence to think. 2 hours later, the first light broke across the horizon, streaks of purple and gold cutting through the clouds as I pulled into the driveway and no other cars. I used the spare key hidden under the 3rd porch step, another habit my grandfather had insisted on, and went straight to the kitchen. The trash can sat where I'd left it. And there I was, a grown woman with a college degree, elbow deep in garbage at 5:30 in the morning. Business casual, rummaging through coffee grounds and napkins like some kind of raccoon with a law background, and my grandfather would have been proud. My therapist would have had questions. I found the passbook near the bottom, stained but intact. I wiped it clean, heart pounding. Before I tell you what was inside, and why it made a bank manager call the police, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I see everything, and I truly appreciate your support. Because once I opened that passbook, there was no going back. I eased the study door shut behind me and let the silence settle. The room was barely bigger than a walk-in closet, but it felt dense with history. Floor-to-ceiling shelves pressed in on all sides, sagging under the weight of decades of books. The air carried that unmistakable mix of old paper and pipe tobacco. Dry, sharp, comforting. It smelled like my grandfather. I didn't even have to search. My eyes went straight to the chest shelf, muscle memory guiding me like I'd been there yesterday instead of years ago. Strategic endgame. A master's guide. Same spot. Same angle. Same faint crease in the spine from where I dropped it as a kid. The moment I lifted it, something felt off, not dramatically. Not enough to alarm anyone else. Just heavier than it should have been. The kind of wrong you only notice if you're paying attention. My fingers tightened. I opened the cover. There were no pages. Well, there were, but they'd been hollowed out, carved with almost obsessive precision. Inside the cavity sat an old leather passbook, edges worn soft, corners rounded like it had been handled for years. The leather was cracked and dark, the kind of thing you'd expect to see behind glass in a museum. It didn't look like it belonged to this century, let alone hidden inside a chessbook on a farmhouse shelf my pulse picked up. This wasn't forgotten. This was concealed. I carried it into the living room intending, naively, to share what I'd found. "Mom," I started, holding it out. "I found something in Grandpa's." Her reaction was instant. Too instant. Miriam crossed the room in 3 sharp steps and yanked the passbook out of my hands. She didn't really look at it. Not the way someone curious would. She glanced, just long enough to confirm what it was, then turned and hurled it into the kitchen trash. "This is garbage," she snapped. "Old accounts that don't even exist anymore." Froze. "You didn't even. It should have stayed buried with him," she cut in, voice cold now. "Don't go digging through his things, Danica. It's not appropriate." From the couch, Wyatt let out a laugh, eyes still glued to his phone. "Always the sentimental one, aren't you, Danny?" Then I saw it at my mother looked at my brother. My brother looked back. It lasted maybe half a second. Flicker. Almost nothing. But I saw it. 8 years working at a law firm teaches you to recognize that look. The one people share when they realize someone's getting too close. When they're silently asking, "Did you tell her anything?" and answering no. "Did you?" My stomach dropped. That night sleep never came. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every second. If the passbook was truly worthless, my mother would have dismissed it, not destroyed it. She wouldn't have moved that fast. She wouldn't have used words like buried. And my grandfather, Eugene Gross, accountant for 40 years, did not keep meaningless things. He didn't hide trash inside chess books. He didn't whisper instructions on his deathbed for nostalgia's sake. People only react with anger when they have something to hide. By 5 in the morning, I was dressed. The drive back to the farmhouse took 2 hours. Gray light pressed against the windshield. The world hushed and suspended. I turned the radio off. I needed every thought clear. When I arrived, the sky was just beginning to break, purple bleeding into gold. No cars in the driveway. I used the spare key under the 3rd porch step. Straight to the kitchen. Straight to the trash. There I was, a grown woman with a college degree, elbow deep in garbage at 5:30 a.m., digging through coffee grounds and napkins in business casual like some kind of raccoon with a law background. My grandfather would have been proud. My therapist would have had questions. I found it near the bottom. Dirty, but intact. That I wiped it clean with my sleeve and finally really looked at it. The leather was old, but what was inside didn't match. The account number format was wrong. Too many digits. Too modern. That alone sent a chill up my spine. Then I noticed something else. A tiny fold near the spine, a note. Folded into a precise little square. Written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Account number 77412289. They don't know about this one. Ask for full history. Trust no one in the family. Only you, Danica. I read it 3 times. Then I did the smartest thing I could think of. I took photos of everything, the passbook, the note, every detail, and uploaded them to cloud storage before I even left the kitchen. Law firm training drilled one rule into you early. Documents can be destroyed, files can disappear, but digital backups are forever. 10 a.m. My phone rang. "Mom." Her voice was sweet. Concerned. The voice she used for neighbors and church friends. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. Yesterday was such a hard day. There it was. You didn't take anything from the farmhouse, did you? She asked lightly. Everything belongs to the estate now. I lied smoothly. Just one of Grandpa's chess books. 4 memories. There was a pause. Calculating. Measuring. Then relief. Good. That's fine. Her tone sharpened. But don't go digging through his things anymore. Some things are better left alone. Your grandfather wasn't well at the end. His mind was going. He didn't always know what was real. I said nothing. Inside I was screaming. 2 weeks ago he'd looked me in the eye and given precise instructions. That wasn't confusion. That was a planned 87 that evening. My brother called. Wyatt hadn't voluntarily contacted me in 6 months. His voice was too casual, too friendly. About as natural as a cat offering to do your taxes. Mom mentioned you've been asking about Grandpa's stuff, he said. You don't need to worry about any of it. We've got it handled. Translation: I got nothing. Just let it go, Danny, he added. It's not worth the fight. After the call, I sat in my apartment and wrote everything down. Exact phrases. Durations. Miriam at 10 a.m. Wyatt at 7 p.m. 9 hours apart. Coordinated. Checking what I knew. Aligning their story. They were scared that I looked at the passbook again. The note. At the modern account number hiding behind antique leather. The next morning I took a personal date. I was going to that bank. Whatever my mother was so desperate to keep buried, I was about to drag into the light. I took a personal date. My boss approved it in under 30 seconds, mostly because I never take time off and partly because I looked like someone holding back a minor breakdown. By 6:30 a.m. I was in my car, the passbook tucked carefully into my bag alongside my ID, my grandfather's death certificate, and every document that proved I was who I said I was. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few $100s. Maybe an old account that had been closed years ago. Mostly I wanted answers. The bank, First Regional Savings, no longer technically existed. It had been absorbed by a larger institution sometime in the last decade. Its name reduced to a footnote. But the main branch was still standing in Millbrook, the same town my grandfather had driven into every Friday for groceries and mail. Millbrook was exactly as I remembered it. One traffic light. One diner that proudly served the same burnt coffee since 1972. I pulled into the parking lot at 9:15 a.m. and sat there for a moment, steadying myself. This was probably nothing, I told myself. My mother was probably right. Inside, a young teller greeted me with a bright smile. I handed over the passbook. She typed in the account number. Her smile faded. She blinked, frowned, then excused herself and disappeared into the back with the passbook still in her hands. I sat in the lobby for 20 minutes, growing increasingly aware of how ridiculous I must look. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe there was nothing here at all. The security guard, Carl, according to his badge, decided this was the perfect time to tell me about his training for a 5K and how his wife had made him give up bread. I nodded politely, watching him stare mournfully at the complimentary mints like a man grieving a lost love. Then a man in an expensive suit appeared. "Miss Gross?" he asked. He introduced himself as Theodore Calloway, regional manager. Tall, gray at the temples, face professionally neutral. He led me into a private office and closed the door behind us. His hands were slightly unsteady as he took the passbook from me. Examining it like it might explode, he sat heavily in his leather chair and let out a long breath. "Miss Gross," he said carefully, "this account is flagged in our system." My stomach dropped. He held up a hand. "Not because of anything you've done. Because of its history." The account wasn't from 1962, despite the antique cover. It had been opened in 2010. My grandfather had deliberately used a vintage passbook to disguise it. It was a savings instrument with compound interest, untouched for 14 years. He wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. $2 147 832. I made a noise I can only describe as what happens when you accidentally sit on a cat. Part gasp, part wheeze, part desperate need to lie down. He offered me water. I told him I needed something stronger. $2 million. My grandfather, who owned 3 sweaters and drove the same truck for 20 years, had hidden $2 million. Calloway's expression darkened. There's something else, he said, and in 2015, someone had attempted to access the account. They had power of attorney documents, a signature authorizing a transfer. But the verification system flagged inconsistencies. The signatures didn't quite match. Access was denied. The attempt was logged. I already knew the answer when I asked. Who? Miriam Gross, he said. Is that a relative? My mother. She tried to steal this money 9 years ago. The room filled with people. Security. Legal. Files pulled from archives. Records from other banks. And as the picture came together, it was devastating. The pieces didn't come together all at once. They stacked. Slowly. Methodically. And the picture they formed made my stomach twist. Calloway laid it out in a calm, professional voice. The way people do when the truth is too ugly to deliver any other way. My grandfather had money. Real money. In 1995, when his parents passed, Eugene inherited a substantial amount. Being who he was, an accountant to his bones, he invested it carefully, quietly, letting it grow year after year. By 2009, around the time my father died, he had more than $1 million spread across multiple accounts. That's when everything changed. After my dad's death, my mother stepped in as Eugene's caretaker. She framed it as devotion. They were confident, certain they'd won. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside, her voice soft, concerned. I know we don't always see eye to eye, she said. But we're family. Of course, Mom, I replied. Family first. Inside, I wanted to scream. My grandfather taught me chess at 7. His favorite lesson was that the best move isn't always the obvious one. Sometimes you sacrifice a piece to win the game. He sacrificed his final years setting this trap. He knew he wouldn't see it spring. But he knew I would. The call came on a Thursday morning. We're executing warrants today, Jefferson said. Arrests will be simultaneous. At 7 a.m., my mother answered the door in her bathrobe, coffee in hand. When she saw the badges, the mask slipped for the first time. She tried manipulation. Excuses. Jefferson didn't blink. This isn't a mistake, she said. This is consequences. Wyatt was arrested at the same moment, in front of his colleagues. His reputation died right there. Court took months. Evidence piled up. Doctors testified my grandfather had never shown signs of dementia. The incompetency ruling was built on lies. Wyatt tried for a deal. His lawyer came to me. In chess, I said, you don't negotiate with pawns. It didn't matter anyway. Prosecutors had everything. On a cold February day, the judge sentenced them. 7 years for my mother. 3 for my brother. Full restitution. Everything liquidated. That I didn't feel triumph. Just completion. 2 days later, I returned to Whitmore's office. He handed me one last envelope. My name, written in my grandfather's hand. Before I opened it, Whitmore explained. The hidden account was mine. The will named me sole beneficiary. Mother and brother were excluded, with documentation. The farmhouse proceeds would come to me. About $2.5 million total. The money felt abstract. The letter didn't. My dearest Danica, it began. If you're reading this, you found the passbook. He explained why he chose me. Why he trusted me. Why he endured. The truth is patient, he wrote. It can wait longer than any lie. I cried again. Healing tears. 6 months later, I left my law firm. Paid my debts. Bought a small storefront downtown. Opened a bookshop. Called it Gross Pages. My grandfather would have loved the PUN. In the back corner sits a chess table. Above it hangs his photo and his favorite saying. The truth waited. And this time it won.